Why do we spend hours researching, discussing, debating who is the better fantasy option for a given week? If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already a fan or at least familiar with the beautiful fantasy game. Maybe you've laid in bed scrolling through articles on a player's status before the lineup deadline locks the next day. I want you to know you're not alone. My name is Asa Rehman, and I suffer from that same passion. This podcast is about finding out why we love fantasy sports so much and learning more about the growing fantasy industry. The first episode will focus on me. Why do I love fantasy sports? When I was 8 years old, I wrote out my dreams of becoming a professional soccer player, star striker for AC Milan, Italy of all places. It was an ambitious dream that included a Lamborghini, and it would have been a fun anecdote if it ever became reality. The way we often hear about Olympic gymnasts writing out their aspirations of one day winning gold for their country after we see them standing on a podium. The truth is, most of those crayon contracts are tossed but not forgotten. For me, that dream guided me toward a career in sports broadcasting and eventually led me to becoming co-founder of a fantasy sports company called Now Fantasy. But I'll save the story of my professional journey for another podcast episode. This time, I'll reflect on how the passion started, why it still drives me. My dad always had a strong influence on me, and we liked some of the same sports teams. The topic and banter would always find its way into our phone conversations, but I've never really stopped to ask how it all began. So I guess I'll do that now.
Hi.
Hey, Dad, how's it going?
Great.
So I'm trying to figure out how I became a fantasy sports fan. And I know that you're not totally into fantasy gaming, but I also know that you're a massive sports fan. And I'm curious to know from you when you noticed that I started to take a greater interest in sports in general.
Well, as far as I recall, you always wanted to play. You played all kinds of sports, but I think the turning point is when we went to Victoria. Remember, you played for the KLM team. It was kind of an all-star team.
Yeah.
And that's when your enthusiasm really went up, because then now you were playing with, select sites, and your interest really boomed. And then we started looking for good teams, and it was basically that the West Side offered better coached teams.
So it's mostly playing. I enjoyed playing so much.
Yes.
And then watching the game.
Yeah, and then you started getting interested in teams, and because I was always a Man U fan, but you asked me about players, and this is when you started, evaluating players. And one of the guys I mentioned was Hullet. At his time, he was one of the best in the world, and you got a liking to it, and then that's how you fell in love with Chelsea.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that specifically because, yeah, we're both Dallas Cowboys fans, huge Montreal Canadiens fans as well. But yeah, as you mentioned, you're a Manchester United supporter, and I love Chelsea. You talked about how it happened, but I'm curious to know how that made you feel. Was there any resentment at the time?
Well, I'm always I'm always a soccer fan. The great players are great players. It doesn't matter who they play for, and you always appreciate for what they achieve and what they show you and what you can learn from them, their skill level. And
yeah, I can hear the passion when you talk about sport in general. What drew you to the game? How did you get so invested in sports?
Well, in our early days, we where we grew up, we always
you grew up where? In Fiji?
In Fiji, and we were taught by brothers, and the brothers were kind of, I guess they were like monks. They lived in the schools, and they taught kids how to play soccer, and we always excelled in soccer. Our teams were always the best. And one of the things that it follows around Man U because of the Munich disaster, and it happened at that time, that period, and everybody in our town just fell in love with that, and that's how the Man U fan just grew. and
Right.
everywhere we go, we find Man U fans
Hmm.
from that city, like and
You carried that with you from Fiji to Vancouver, British Columbia, and you kept following sports, all sports. Why did you continue to follow sports and find time and find ways to track all this stuff down? Do you ever wonder about that?
No, I think I grew up in sports because my dad was into sports, and he was an avid boxing fan.
Yeah.
He refereed and managed fights, so it ran in our blood that we were sports enthusiasts. And
Yeah.
I guess it reflects on you too, like and it doesn't have, you don't have to bring it up because you're already in it. And then coming in North America, I knew nothing about football. I started watching football, and I just fell in love with the game. And then I started watching players and the positions, and I started scouting players, and
Yeah.
grading them. And that's I guess that's what you do now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So would you join a fantasy team now? Any interest in joining fantasy games now?
Well, I may be interested in it, but I'm not really into it right now because it takes a lot of your time. It takes a lot of research, and you gotta get.
Yeah. Your grandson's pretty into following sports and players now, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's passed on to generations now. This guy, he knows more than I do. He analyzes players, and he even ranks them like I used to do before. That this guy is the fourth best in the world. He's in this category.
Yeah.
And he gives numbers on them. I said, gee, it's so they start very young these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause-
Well, whatever it is, whatever grabs our attention and piques our interest seems to stay with us because I still play fantasy sports. I still follow all these games, try to figure out what I can about all these players. And yeah, it starts at a young age, as you mentioned. And I don't know if it'll ever stop. Do you think you'll ever stop loving sports?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I see you people are all into it. Is because in our family, I think I was the one that initiated this interest for sports, and everybody I get in contact with, they become great enthusiasts,
Yeah.
of the game, and you can see your cousins and my cousins, they all just love the game, and
Yeah.
hence they all Cowboy fans,
Thank you for that. We'll always have United and Chelsea rivalry to sit on opposite ends.
Oh, yeah, that's a good thing,
For sure.
we can't all have one team, like
Yeah, there's no fun in that. All right, Dad. Thanks so much. It's been fun.
Okay, you're welcome, and keep up the good work.
So for me, it's genetic. I almost had no choice. I was destined to experience the highs and lows of following a favorite team. Now that I have a better understanding of where my passion for sports came from, I just need to figure out the fantasy angle. And for that, I'll call one of my closest cousins. Jordan and I went to high school together and have been in the same fantasy leagues from the very beginning, which goes back at least 20 years. Yeah, we're old.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot, man.
All right, so I just talked to my dad, and I'm trying to figure out how I became so involved with fantasy sports. He gave me the rundown on just sports in general and how I used to love playing and watching with him. But when I'm thinking about fantasy sports in particular, I'm trying to determine where it all began. And I'm wondering if you could help me out. Do you remember when we started playing fantasy sports?
I mean, it had to start with our football league,
Yeah.
right? The inaugural season. I mean, I had maybe dabbled before that. So when was that? Oh, was that
Was it in high school? Like,
No, for me it was university.
yeah.
So I think I would have said university. I don't remember playing in high school.
I think that's right. I remember hosting draft parties where we'd
Yeah,
get together. I think it was one time at my place in my condo, and we had the draft board on the wall. Do you remember this?
I do with the
We had the
stickers.
We that's right. We had the stickers and the draft board, and there are a few names that didn't have stickers, so we'd have to draw them onto the sheet of paper that was on the wall,
Yeah.
and it was a great party, like, had so much fun just going through the entire draft. And I think it was a day or 2 later, I still had the draft board up on the wall, and my girlfriend at the time came by and said, "Oh, that looks like fun. Did you guys put anything behind the white piece of paper?" And I was like, "No, why would we do that?" And she peeled it off, and sure enough, you had, like, ink on the wall. And, yeah, I think that's one of the earliest memories I have of, playing fantasy sports. When I think of that and I think of all the years we've dedicated to it, I'm pretty amazed that we've never really stopped or slowed down. We keep playing season
Yeah.
after season. I think it's the one thing I've committed to the most in my life. We've gotten gym memberships and tested all this other stuff out, tried things, but
Yeah.
for whatever reason, fantasy sports, I just keep doing it. And I don't think I'm gonna stop. Do you think you'll ever stop playing?
No, and I think as long as like you have like the group of people to play with, because I think the camaraderie is a big part of it. Um, so like the fact that we got into some really good leagues with some people that we just really want to stay in touch with, I think has obviously played a big role. So I can't see me wanting that to change, you know? So
Yeah.
no, I don't think so. And just um how competitive we are, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't see my competition I thought would go away as I got older as well. Like my level of just obsessive competition, but no, it doesn't. Every
Yeah.
year it just gets almost worse. So
Yeah. And we lose more than we win. I mean, that's just a fact.
oh, we talked about that. Like
Yeah.
it's 90, 85 to 90% misery.
Yeah.
Fantasy sports.
Terrible
A
success rate.
horrible
It's
success.
just constant failure. Yeah, we keep coming back.
Keep coming back and knowing the odds, but because when you felt and tasted that sweet victory,
Yeah.
there's nothing like it.
Yeah, but there are people in our league who haven't tasted that sweet victory and they keep coming back. So
And they're still around. I don't know what's wrong with them. I don't know
I
what's going on.
wonder what the reasoning is there. So you mentioned the competitiveness. Is that what drives you? Is that what keeps us coming back? That's the thing that I'm trying to figure out as well. Is it just the competitiveness? I think there's something to having a say, having some control over, building a team, sort of putting your money where your mouth is and
Yeah.
being able to brag about knowing that a player is going to succeed and then that coming true.
Yep, but that's also competitiveness, right?
Yeah.
We're competitive in what we think we know
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
certain players, about what guys are going to do, what teams are going to be good. Yeah, that's all part of it. I think I was listening to my go-to, the fantasy footballers,
Yeah.
and they had a poll on their website. It was why do you play fantasy football? And yeah, those were like the questions, right? Like for the camaraderie of playing with the group of people that we play with, or for the competition of it, like the need to win,
Hmm.
um, for the money. And I can't remember what the fourth one was, but yeah, it was basically when they were listing them down, except for the money one, I was like, yeah, all of those.
Yeah.
But like to boil it down to like one thing, I think yeah, I just think it's a mixture of a lot of those things, right?
Yeah.
Competition,
Yeah. And
camaraderie, and yeah, putting your money where your mouth is.
yeah. And you mentioned it started with football with NFL fantasy. And I think we did some hockey. I know you do some basketball. I haven't been in the same fantasy basketball league as you, but
Hockey's fun.
um,
Yeah.
soccer's been one of the ones that we've picked up recently. I think we're going on about 5 years with that. Uh, yeah, I want to know what you've enjoyed about that, just the fantasy soccer game, because it is a little bit different. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we've all enjoyed that league as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, started with the FPL, right? I mean, just being a huge soccer fan,
Yeah,
um, and being a huge fantasy geek. I mean, I think it was just once we found out about it, I think it was just a no-brainer.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, you're right. It's like a completely different type of system, especially the FPL side of it, before we started to do this heads up thing. So
Yeah.
for me, it was like a cool change of pace. Like I get a chance to pick any of the good players that I want. Whereas in fantasy, you're always kind of limited, at least the way we play, to like
Hmm.
the guys that are on your team, right? So it was just a cool, different, fresh, new way to play with a sport that I probably spend too much time watching and following.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, it was no brainer for me to jump
So,
in. And then now that we've got this league, it's even more fun.
and we both started playing, like I said before, we got on this call, I think about 20 years ago, before we
Mhm.
had kids, before we have families, both parents now. Would you would you ever play in the same fantasy league as your kids?
Yeah, I thought about that. That would be hilarious, and I would.
Yeah.
I totally would. I think once they see how obsessed we are with it, they're either gonna be fully on board or they're gonna make fun of us for it, one or the other. But yeah, as soon as Jay wants to play, like I'm all over it.
Love it.
That'll be funny.
It would be good. All right, man. Thanks a lot. This was helpful.
Yeah, of course. Anytime, buddy.
The reason I love fantasy sports and dedicate so much time to it is because obsessing over athletics runs in my family, and I crave competition. As my guest pointed out, I too don't anticipate stopping anytime soon. I'll be an active participant in the billion-dollar industry that continues to grow every year, and this podcast will cover a wide variety of topics on the fantasy industry. I hope you enjoyed this one. Special thanks to my dad and cousin Jordan for being good sports and joining in on the discussion. Enjoy the rest of your day, do something good for someone, and make sure you catch the next episode. Take care.